Dave Hajdu is an entrepreneur, technology leader, and founder. He began his career at Microsoft before going on to found and scale multiple technology businesses, including TinyPulse, the employee engagement platform that raised $9.5 million and was later acquired by WebMD. He's also the founder of EO Vietnam and has served as an area director for the Entrepreneurs Organization across Southeast Asia. Today, as founder of Edge8 and the AI Officer Institute, Dave is focused on one of the biggest shifts facing business leaders. He argues that AI isn't just changing the tools we use, it's changing where work happens, how organizations operate, and what leadership itself needs to become. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brad.
It is my pleasure. Looking forward to our conversation today. For most of your career, you've been trying to understand and improve human performance through different ways. Certainly TinyPulse was a tool that I was aware of and that we had clients that used. What's changing about work today that most business leaders haven't yet noticed in that context?
Yeah, I think that, at TinyPulse, we worked with a gentleman, Dr. Holto, who I'm actually working with again now, and he's one of the most cited authors in the world on retention. And when you look at employee engagement and the early indicators of retention, what you find is, we had broken it down to like 15 drivers. And, there's quite a few different ones, but at the end of the day, there's nobody who's bad at their job that's happy, right? And so performance is always kind of at the top, right? Like you just don't, no ping pong table is going to save that. And so if you're talking about building a great culture, it has to be performant as well. And so I just, after we exited Tiny Pulse, I was thinking about what to do next. And it was pretty clear that really the path to performance was going to be AI, and the people that don't adopt those skills, you're going to fall behind pretty quickly. So I think that's, that's a key thing. If you want to have great culture, you want to be goal driven, you want to care about the work and have purpose. And I think without AI, it's going to be really hard to keep up.
I think that's interesting because a lot of the entrepreneurs and leaders that I've observed, either I suppose in our network through EO and YPO, or the clients we work with, or perhaps further afield, are really just looking for a frame, some kind of lens through which they know there's changes happening, but they're looking for a lens through which to gain a frame on this is where it's going. So what I like about what you've said there is it's yes, it's human performance, and I think that's a timeless statement that people will be. What was it? No one who's unhappy was good at their job, or something like that.
Yeah.
I know I misrepresented that. My apologies, but they're looking for a frame that gives them a direction into the future.
Yeah. So, interesting enough, I started my career at University of Washington, and there was a brand new major at the time called information systems, and it was 50% computer science and 50% business, and it's kind of defined my life, for better or for worse in certain situations. But I, I there was one of those like headline grabber posts circulating in Silicon Valley like a year and a half ago, and it was the non-technical founder is dead. And, that's an interesting statement to hear if you're in construction, right? But a year plus ago, we were at the Global Leadership Conference in Hawaii, and there was a woman named Dr. Pinar Oshan who runs the Innovation Institute at Oxford. And so she was speaking about data and making data-driven decisions. And so I actually asked her, because I had a project on measuring transformational growth, and I said, "Hey, what is it to you?" And she said, "Well, half of it is what you think. It's the normal leadership and it's hard. The other half of it is going to be tech, the ability to adopt tech." And this really like framed how I think about business now. And I call that the other 50%. And when I think about, leadership skills, like we just taught up in Georgetown University, and they have a great leadership program, you develop your leadership brand, your emotional intelligence, how to coach people, how to do, set performance, how to drive change, all these like, 12 key things about being a leader. But the other 50% is actually, I break it down to three things. And, the first one is understanding information. So, like, how are you organize your information? Because if you don't, AI doesn't work, right? And this is actually, and people don't work either, right? If you take a new hire and you throw them at a job and they don't have the information they need to make a decision, they can't make the decision and they get stuck, right? So I think that's skill number one. The second skill is workflow design. As entrepreneurs, we have a lot of stuff in our heads. There's some stuff that gets on paper. There's some things like amazing HR books that nobody ever reads, right? And so like these things are kind of it's tough. So workflow design is actually really critical, and that's why I think young professionals and founders and directors and people who know the business are going to be better at AI than engineers will be because they can find those processes, but they have to like be consciously thinking about that, right? And be consciously thinking like, what's a process that I don't want to do? I would get much more value if I was talking to recruits versus scanning resumes. Okay, great. So what's my process? What's the output, right? And then the third thing is the creation of instructions. And instructions translates to code, right? And this is where I think Pinar O'Shawn and people like David Sachs and people I follow in Silicon Valley are saying that you have to have a basic understanding of code, and a code isn't what we think it is. Prompts are code, right? Instructions are just what we're telling a computer that gets translated to these ones and zeros, right? And then AI is a whole nother world with what it's doing. But understanding those three things allow you to do so much. And we just did this thing in Dubai, and watching founders come up with like ideas like, hey, this is how I would onboard. This is how my sales manager would coach people. Tut 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 tut. It's a beautiful thing. And so when you start to understand those three skills and the other 50%, it doesn't matter what you are. You could be construction, medical. Well, it's all the same, right? And applying those is actually the hard part. I'll just leave like one last note from Georgetown. We've helped them build an AI leadership coach, and it took 5 minutes. But all the homework leading up to it, to build your brand and your emotional all these things that have to go into it to help AI make good decisions about you and your communication, that was like 8 hours of homework and another 12 hours of, or sorry, 20 pound my math is off, 20 hours of class, right? And so
Yeah.
the effort that it took to build that leadership coach, it's not a one-shot prompt.
Yeah, saw a tweet X post by Satya Nadella yesterday. I don't know if you saw it, but he was talking about these two frames in a very similar way that you were, and it's kind of blown up. Uh, Maybe you're on the plane,
Yeah. I
but
was on
yeah, but it's essentially saying, and it's through a Microsoft lens. So he's got his own agenda, let's say, but essentially saying that there is workflow design that's essential, and then there's the things that agents can do, and effectively that there is that humans can't leave the loop. It is the combination of the loop that creates the value as we look to the future. So I found that fascinating anyway. Um, a lot of the leaders that we're working with have this sense that if they don't get AI right in the next 3 to 5 years, that they could become the next Kodak or Blockbuster, that there is this existential threat. How real do you think that is in turn if they don't, I'll say, embrace AI is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, I think that, ultimately just their efficiency won't be able to keep up, right? And so a lot of people like Kathy Woods and even the chairman of the Fed before in the U.S. they talked about this like transient inflation, and I think it's taking longer than they thought. But with things like AI that help you actually compress your processes down and save money, your prices can start to drop, right? And so just give you a really simple recruitment example. I have this gal named Mai who works for me, and she'd worked for probably like 3 years when she got a job with me, but she was super tech curious. This was probably about 2.5 years ago. And so we looked at her recruitment cycle, and she said she spends about 40 hours per job just scanning resumes. Okay. And then our days to hire in my last company, TinyPulse, was about 43. in Vietnam. So it took a long, long time to like get people in and do this and get them into the door. Our days to hire is 17 now, and she spends almost zero time on scanning resumes because all that has to happen is they hit it into a folder. Our first automation was like put them all in a folder and then one at a time look at them, and that took like I don't know 4 hours or something like that. Whatever it took to run this thing. But then at the end of the day, she got a list of like, hey, here's 10 people to call. And my friends are like, "Oh, you're gonna miss people." I'm like, "Sure, you're gonna miss people even if you read them all. It doesn't matter, right?" But now my day to hire is like 17. So how much money does that save me in my hiring process? How much more efficient is it with candidates because they're not sending a resume and waiting? We're literally following an exact schedule and cycle, which gives us an advantage. And so if I have a hiring advantage over you, what's going to happen? Probably gonna get better talent than you, right? And I think that's, generally speaking, gonna happen in a lot of different places. And so the other thing that I see is that the smartest kids coming out of school right now, they're all AI first. And so if you don't have a culture and environment with official AI programs and, a path for them to improve that skill, they're not working for you anymore. I just hired a bookkeeper recently, and I forget which one of the big firms. It might have been Deloitte or something she came from. And at that point in time, they weren't letting her use AI. And so, you have these people in every
Just
account.
crazy.
Right, right, and then so what happens is there's no formal program. She doesn't have a $100 Claude subscription, and so she can't really operate like she wants to, and then it's not secure. So then what happens? She just goes and uses a free tool on her own and compromises data, and so
Yeah.
and this was the common story of people who applied. They were looking for somewhere to build that muscle, that AI muscle, and so I just think if you just take talent alone, it's gonna be really, really hard to keep up, with companies that are embracing it, and so, and that's just one example.
It's just the compression of time, and it's the it's certainly you've illuminated a business process, but to your earlier point, I think that's where the construction manager was the example that you gave, will win because that is one point, but there must be so many workflows inside a construction company that can be massively compressed and made more uh, or improved on their quality.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
100% agreed.
So where does leadership go then? If we start to think about the way that leaders managed people throughout all of history, we're now looking at a leadership needing to manage humans and to also manage a part of the team that isn't human. So what does leadership become when we're managing humans and non-humans, if that makes sense?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And so we talk about this all the time actually as we work with clients. It's like, hey, you've got people using AI for sure. That's, the past, right? Going forward, the best people are gonna be able to lead AI as part of this team, right? And so in Mai's case, I'll just stick with the recruitment. She's got multiple AI agents that work with her and do things like scan resumes that and listen to interviews, right? Score them, and so you can go and you can buy some of these tools and they'll still cost you money in SaaS, or you can just make it, right? And so I kind of break it down into, sort of two things. It's like one is using AI to build things. And so, we're in a digital world now. So it doesn't matter what you're in, maybe you're reading your contracts, OCR, scanning, doing things. That's tech, that happens in medical, construction, doesn't matter the industry. And so there's building and there's also process automation, right? And so it's a very different skill actually when you talk about like how do you write code versus how do you actually like define process and have agents that work for you. But leading is really about those two things. And ultimately, every person should have multiple agents working for them. And a company needs to make sure that they understand jobs and they can do that. The hard part, though, isn't that. You can hire AI engineers and you can probably figure that out. The hard part is leading the change. The old adage in software is that the people who got you from 0 to 1 might be holding you back from 1 to 10, and same thing from 10 to 100, right? And so that's just kind of what it is, and I think that's where founders are gonna have some really hard decisions because the inertia that happens when people are pulling back and they don't want to adopt is tough, and interesting enough, the last class in Georgetown's leadership series is on leading change. And so they have a process around that actually do it, right? But it starts with acceptance. It's like, do people accept what you're doing, and how do you motivate them to do that? So I think it's hard. Cultural change. We in that industry for 10 years is one of the hardest things you can do. And so if you have a culture where one of my teammates is an AI, what about like 5 years from now when it's a robot? It's a Tesla robot that's like assigned to sit with me and go get the coffee and do all those things. Different world, right?
Because then you need to have the EQ to manage the people, and you need to have the motivational skills, and you need to have a whole range of different skills to manage the robots, right? So leaders are getting it backwards in a way at the moment. So your firm has produced a AI leadership report that's available on your website, and that argues that successful AI implementation is roughly 50% data, 25% workflows, and only 25% AI itself. But most organizations either view this change or spend most of their effort on the AI. Why do you think that leaders are getting it backwards, and what should they be focusing on instead?
Well, I come from the sports world, so I was a relatively competitive athlete growing up, and there's no shortcuts, right? Like, there's no shortcut to training, there's no shortcut to planning, and so the I saw a great post on this from this guy Dan Shipper that I follow. But what he said is, in the old world, and I was a product manager for a while too at Microsoft. You have 20% planning and 80% execution. So if I have a 100-hour project, 20/80, right? Pretty simple. Well, AI's flipped that to where it's 80% planning and 20% execution. Well, what does that mean? I still have to do the 20 hours of planning. There's no getting around that, right? Now I can use AI, maybe I can get that down a little bit, but then the execution maybe takes 5 hours, right? Because now I'm iterating with AI and it's moving really, really fast. And so, but what you'll find is if your plan is off, you just rapidly make mistakes. That's the speed of AI is actually compressing everything and it's exposing our flaws, right? So that's where I think leaders have kind of got it wrong. And, by nature, we like shortcuts, right? We love the vibe code one shot prompt. It's BS. It doesn't work, right? Life doesn't work like that. And if you expect artificial intelligence that's still in a world of narrow AI to do that for you, you got another thing coming, right? And so I think that's probably part of the problem. It's just the expectation of what AI can do and the natural tendency of humans to want the shortcut.
This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan to build the business that you want and the life that you want. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. And you can also check out our books, Made to Thrive, which is about the 5 roles of a CEO, becoming a great CEO rather than just a good CEO in your business. Second is onboarded, which is about hiring and onboarding great people, making sure that you give yourself the greatest chance for people to succeed in your organization. And then third is bigger isn't better, better is better, which is about building a business that is better rather than bigger. It's not about building a little business. It's about building a business that compounds, a business that you can actually fall in love with again. I've been in one of your training classes over the last on and off over the last year in a different variety. And one of the things that's fascinated me is the quality of the output of the prompt that you've provided, which says to me that all of the work has gone into the prompt. And to read it, it's a prompt, right? But I think that probably reinforces your point that there is a lot of planning that has gone into the design of that prompt.
I mean, for what I just tell people, stop writing prompts, right? I can't write that myself, like AI writes it. So that, we're like coaching is an interesting one, right? So, working with Dr. Holtum, they have this ocean framework for profiling your team, which helps you understand like who they are and personalize. There's a grow framework, which is the most commonly accepted framework in coaching. Um, and so that's the driver of the prompts, right? It's actually not, what you think. It's not act as a manager and blah, 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 blah. That whole like race and roads, that was great a couple years ago to get a little bit familiar, but you don't need that anymore. Like AI is really smart at writing. It's better at writing prompts than we ever will be, right? But what it needs is academic and business frameworks. And so I actually have a post on my website. It's like 100 frameworks to follow. And there are things like jobs to be done. So the famous Harvard professor talked about this idea that like, why are people buying milkshakes in the morning? Well, the job to be done was actually the fact that, most of those people were on a 30-minute commute and they wanted something that they could sit that had some substance to take time, and they wanted to fill themselves enough so they weren't hungry again at 9, right? And so the understanding the jobs to be done, that's a Harvard framework. Well, educate yourself and learn that stuff, and then you tell AI, "Hey, you know what? We wanna build these personas based on the jobs to be done framework." And then all of a sudden your quality level has, like, exponentially increased instead of saying, "Hey, act as a marketing manager and build me a persona." It's just gonna be the average of average. So I think that's a lot of what that comes down to in terms of, prompts. It's like I told people already, just stop writing prompts. Don't think about prompts. Don't think about prompt frameworks. They don't matter. What you want to think about is like, what is the business framework? What is the academic framework? And teach yourself. AI is not going to make you stupider. It's going to make you a hell of a lot smarter if you just research. If you just go look at like, what are these top, and these are highly researched things, that academia has figured out and businesses use and McKinsey and Bain and these guys use. So you should too.
Use it. Yeah.
Yeah, use
So,
it.
so,
Use it. Free.
so use it.
Yeah, it's free.
It comes back to planning. Planning is so important and getting it
Yes.
clear. I want to pull on a thread that is a provocative claim that you make, and just kind of see where that takes us. The provocative claim is that the CMS is dead. CMS being the content management system. Listeners may know a popular example as WordPress. And so
Shutter.
there are others as yeah. So why is the CMS dead? Point number one. And what else is dying because of AI, and what replaces it?
Yeah. So ironically, I built CMS systems as my first business out of Microsoft. And so this is pre WordPress, pre Wix, pre any of that stuff, pre Medium. And so the reason why you built it, and we were trying to solve this problem that like 80% of restaurants put their websites online and they were out of date within months, because it was too hard to update them, right? And so back then you had like Front Page and Dreamweaver and you had to actually write code. Now, the good thing about writing code is you can make it look any way you want. But the bad thing about it is you got to know code, right? And you can make mistakes very easily. And so if I have a blog post now, I can go into this like big bloated fat thing called WordPress or Wix, whatever. They're all the same. I've got to fill in fields. I got to fill in SEO fields. It's actually a lot of work, and it's not going to look the way I want because it's hard to actually get formatting in a CMS system that's constraining you by design. And so if you think about all that, the CMS was created to help you write code. That's it, full stop. And so why is the CMS dead? Because Claude is better at writing code than you are. And so if you have to use a tool, that does all these things, it's tough. And so for fun, I just built a CMS for EO chapters, right? And so EO chapters, we have events, we have surveys, we have uh, we've got member rosters, all these different things, and they're usually in multiple systems and spreadsheets. And so the other day, our SAP chair said, "Hey, I got to do a proposal." Great, ask Claude. Because once all of our data is centralized and we're no longer using CMS systems, we just use Claude. And so we train our chapter manager on one thing, Claude. If she has to do a blog post, she just tells Claude. we can use, again, going back to business frameworks, there's blog frameworks, there's the thesis manifesto, there's a letter to a friend, there's a listicle. So do people know that when they write blogs? Probably not, right? AI does. And so you can literally pick the right blog framework. It writes the code, so it formats it any way you want, with any pictures you want. It can make its own pictures. And so now all of a sudden the blogs are beautiful and they're custom and you're not tied into a CMS system. And even better, it's fast. So if you go to EO Vietnam's website now versus what it was 2 months ago on Wix, it's like lightning speed because it's all like fast, efficient code. There's no extra stuff behind it trying to make it work. And so if she needs to update a member status, tell Claude. She wants to add a prospect, she can pop it in. Hey, go update the CMS, or no, sorry, the CRM, right? It can literally drive it all. And I think that's why I think it's dead. Like I've literally canceled every subscription I've had in terms of like Wix. We used to host sites on Wix. They're all gone. We've just like literally moved them. We just self-host it. It's cheaper, it's faster, and you only have to learn one skill, Claude.
And so, what is the future path for a marketing company that's built their business around CMS design, customization, hosting? Because a lot of businesses in the marketing world are like that. Do you think that they build and maintain workflows in the
Yeah.
way that you described?
Yeah, I think that business is dead because the quality of the other stuff will be better. And so then the question is, are they willing to cannibalize their own business by figuring out a new way of doing things, right? Which is back in, it's like you always had this decision of, do you build or do you buy? And before, buy was always a better solution, right? That's why SaaS exploded. But, the stock market is pretty smart and you're seeing it all implode right now. And there's a reason for that, right? And there's a reason why Anthropic and OpenAI will be $1 trillion IPOs, because it can do all those things faster, cleaner, more efficient. And I think the key is people will broaden their skill sets. You can't broaden your skill set if you're stuck doing WordPress development, like those people are miserable, right? And so, but you broaden your skill set and all of a sudden, wow, I built a CRM system. Wow. EO transformational growth a couple of years ago was hard. How do you measure transformational growth? Well, you can ask somebody, but that's only part of the equation. You also need to know their behaviors. Well, if your event behaviors over here and your surveys over here, and then your event surveys over here, how am I going to do it, right? And then even harder is, what we learned at TinyPulse, working with Dr. Holton, is it's the delta that matters. It doesn't matter if you rate a 3; it matters if you went from a 3 to a 2 or a 4 to a 3. And so all that stuff is really hard for a human to keep up with. But now, actually, in like EO Vietnam system, we just have this beautiful, engagement metric. It's got 4 quadrants, and one of the ones is actually like silently failing because they're engaged but they're not reporting value, right? And then they've dropped. And so how do you find that if you're a human? You know, it's tough. It's tough.
It's tough. Um, but I think marketing as a function is still highly valuable.
Oh,
I
totally. Totally.
I think they do work and have experience and domain knowledge that no one else does. It's just reframing it in a manner which compresses some of those areas and ties in better to the workflows. Yeah.
100%, because it's still about information. So, let's just go back to the transformational growth. AI can't figure that out. Like, I figured that out with a bunch of EO members, right? Because we understand the business of EO, we understand the journey of an entrepreneur. And so by thinking about this, it's like, oh, okay, well, are they in a forum? That matters, right? Did they lead their forum? That's probably a big indicator. Did they go to an international event? That's a big, so all these things are indicators. AI doesn't know that stuff, so my job as a chapter manager or as a regional director, or now I'm on the Seamless Chapter Global Committee, it's still my job, and AI is gonna, but now all the things we've always wanted to do, we can do it. where before we just couldn't because, that was really, really hard to try to put all that stuff together and link systems and APIs. So I think, if a business is going to take away one thing, listen to this: organize your data into a central database. You probably have different apps, start pulling it all in. And then eventually you can just start replacing a lot of those apps, right? Because you just read and write to that database, and all of a sudden you have a lot of power in your information.
I think it's hard for non-technical founders to appreciate the weight of what you've just said, because for me, having done that in our firm already, I think that's a fundamental redesign of what the business looks like. And one of your colleagues, Steve Brown, said it to me on this podcast many months ago. That really sparked something. And he said, you've got to redesign the business around AI. If you used to be a people business or a machinery business, you've got to redesign it. And that really started that process of thinking differently. How do you get people to think about redesigning when it's such a vastly different it's such a different way to think, especially if you're non-technical.
Yeah, I think of that a little bit differently. I wouldn't redesign around AI. I would redesign around your information. And so, what is the information you have? What do you want to do with it? An example is I keep referencing our leadership course because I'm very fond of all those learnings. But if you're looking at dashboards, a dashboard should help you make a decision, right? It should have the information you need to make a decision. Otherwise, it's useless. I see this all the time. People that put up all these stats. I'm like, for what? What are you trying to do? Right. And so I think that if you don't worry about the AI part and you worry about okay, well, what are the key decisions I have to make in my business? EO, I need to know if people are actually getting transformational growth, if we're achieving our ambition. Great. Okay. What data do I need? I need to know what events they attended to. I need to know their scores. I need to know their transformational growth pulse. I need to know if they're in forum. I need to know like if they've gone up or down. So none of that's AI, right? That's just you understanding your business. And then what you realize is there's gaps, and so Dr. Holton talks about this. A lot of companies, when they build dashboards, I have this data, I pull a dashboard. That's never how it works. It's, I don't have this data. I need to get this data so that I can make this decision. And then when you do that, well, great. Now I have it. AI help me make the decision, right? Or help me understand what's going on, help me know the trend, right? So I can make the decision. Like, I kind of phrased that wrong. I wouldn't ask AI to make the decision. I would say, hey, based on this, what are you seeing? And give me some options. And then I make these decisions. But so that's why I think that, organizing your company around your information and the decisions you have to make is the way to look at it. And you can demystify the tech side of that. It's just information. It's a database, it's data structures, and you probably got to hire somebody to help you actually organize it. But you can do it. Any founder that's not technical, right? That's just information.
Yeah. And I think for me, understanding that information needs to be in markdown files first and foremost was a big change as well. But I don't want to get too technical for the
Yeah.
listeners. That's, I guess, yeah, that's just I guess about my journey. How do you think that leaders can unlearn then? Because there are things that you've got to unlearn. I feel like there's an arc that we've gone on from hosting locally in a SQL database, again, without getting too technical, to everything is on the cloud. And now we are really saying, yeah, no, we've got to design our own architecture, and we've got to be able to own that locally. Probably one of the reasons being so that we're not renting our own intellectual property from another organization that we've trained,
Right.
right? Um, so how do leaders unlearn in the context of that broad framing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that part of that unlearning starts with education, so I think that if people start to understand, like I said, I call them the other 50%, these three skills, and start to demystify the fact that, yeah, it's techie underneath the hood, but actually it's just information. It's just how you do things, and it's just how you tell people to do it, right? Claude calls that skill, the thing's called context. Great, but it's just those three things. And so, unlearning, I guess, the fact that it's not that technical and it's not that complicated. It's just something that I shouldn't say that is actually very complicated. Business is really, really hard, so it's just a matter of like trying to break our business down to, this like nuggets of information and really think deeply about, the fact that, I'm not just creating processes. I'm trying to figure out how do we actually make decisions that move us forward. Great, and so that's, I think, the lens, because we always, as entrepreneurs, we're type A, and we're just going to do this. Well, take a step back, think like a product manager and define your problems. And once you kind of got those, what information do you need to solve that problem? What are the steps you got to take? Does AI fit, or is it a human? Who actually does that? And then what happens afterwards? And so this is like kind of a standard AI program, as we call it. When you think about those things, and so yeah, so I guess that's kind of it. It's like kind of unlearn the fact that you just got to go and like create a bunch of stuff and like take a step back.
So, what does a company look like when it's pretending to do AI versus actually genuinely transforming because of AI? It seems like as I've observed, there's now quite a distinct difference.
Yeah, a few years back when ChatGPT came out, I've got a buddy and he's a brilliant guy. And we started doing these like so we designed his I said, you gotta speak, you got a master's in AI, but you're really cool. So we designed this thing purposely to be like a boot camp to get people exposure and get them excited. But the problem is most people have never got out of that, right? And this is why the MIT study, it's about a year old now, but it hasn't actually changed that much, is that 95% of companies get zero ROI, nothing, right? Because what they've done is like, hey, we got to make some nice Coke bottles. My team can do some research. Everybody feels like rah, rah, rah. And they bought a bunch of tools, like my friends are always telling, I found this tool. I'm like, all that is prompts on top of a model. You're not learning the foundations, right? So if you're trying to use like Lovable, I think it's a great app. All it is prompts on top of the model. It's just helping you prompt better to make a prototype. In our class, you follow this innovation framework, and I mentioned that book, but you follow an innovation framework and you come up with an idea, concept, the information it needs, then you create instructions on your own, right? Ask Claude to write those instructions based on your workflow and what you've defined as your problem, and your prototype in Claude is going to be just as good as Lovable, and you didn't pay the money. So, I think that's kind of how I would look at it.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. You are at the forefront of, I would say, practical applications of AI. Um, what's something that you've changed your mind about in the last 2 years?
That's a good question. I've been kind of on the same soapbox for a little bit of time, but I think that the main thing that I changed my mind on is I used to look at prompt frameworks as being really important. Like I've always said, don't worry about prompting. Worry about learning
Yeah.
prompt frameworks. And so, but when you look at those things like act as a marketing professional, and I want you to do this, and here's an example of it. That's dead. So what I changed my mind on is the fact that I no longer worry about that stuff. And what I worry about is like if I'm going to do a blog post, I want this thing has to iterate. And so AI processes don't work the way humans do. In fact, they're better when you spin up multiple and you let the ideas compete and they loop. And so the problem is that takes time. And so the question is, do you need a fast, lazy prompt, or do you need a perfect blog post? If you want a perfect blog post, what I started doing instead was looking at the people I respect. So Dan Shipper is one of my favorite bloggers. And so I use him as my editor. And he's got a whole bunch of stuff out there about how he writes. And so AI can actually assume, that type of coaching. I can turn him into my coach. And then when I get to SEO, I let it try to SEO the page, that it just created, and it's not that good. And so then Neil Patel is my old advisor. So there's like, hey, Neil Patel enters the room. It's kind of funny watching AI say what's happening, but hey, Neil Patel entered the room, and you're going after keyword you'll never rank for, and so we suggest this long tail. So so I changed my mind that prompt frameworks matter, and I started focusing on like real experts that I can learn how they think. Because if I don't know how they think, I can't prompt. I still can't prompt. So it's really about the education of yourself, the use of experts, and then the use of iteration versus worrying about trying to memorize like 20 prompt frameworks that don't matter.
And is that within an agent or is that within a chat thread that you're describing the blog post?
Yeah, so agent's another interesting word because if you use Claude, there's one agent, Claude. You don't really build agents anymore. The concept is the folder is the agent, right? And so in your folder, you have some context and you have a skill. And so that skill, the Neil Patel skill is created and the Dan Shipper editorial skill is created. I also have a designer skill that's created that just calls Gemini and produces things. And then I have a writer skill, and so that writer actually is trained to not only like write, but it also creates image prompts, right? Because it's
Yeah.
writing a JSON prompt. And so this is a process, right? So I don't think of it as building an agent. I think of it as building a process. And that process has multiple steps, which has multiple folders, that has context and skills. But ultimately, none of that matters if you don't do the most important thing, which is have the source material, right? And so you can't just have AI go research and write you stuff. It's just going to be garbage. But instead, my father's really into fortune telling, another story. But so we talk every Monday for 30 minutes, and then from that talk, basically that becomes a piece of source material. And then in addition, he's got a book that we help him write. He's got the other posts he's done. He's got a kind of a framework on making decisions using these mahjong cards and all that stuff. There's Batsy, Purple Star, a whole bunch of stuff. So that's the source material. And then the 30-minute conversation goes to produce the content calendar, and then everything else runs, and we almost never edit manually anymore, except for images. Images, sometimes we got to look at them. And so I'll just wrap that by saying that process is talk to father in the morning, and then on Monday afternoon, the writer runs, and then it gives me 2 days to review what it wrote, and then the designer runs and produces the images. Great, and then it actually gives me until Monday the following week. And then in his case, on Monday, it's a shock and awe post. On Wednesday, it's how do you actually solve that problem, and then on Friday, it's Feel Good Friday.
Yeah.
There you go, right?
Yeah.
So that's the process, and that allows me time as a human to edit if I need to. And whatever's produced on Monday is gonna go the following week. Because I can control everything in my blog, I just say, "Hey, you know what? Maybe we got 3 weeks or 4 weeks." We got a whole calendar, and then I just talk to them. That's it.
Yeah.
It gets everything ready, and then it just shows up on the day that it's supposed to. And so these are all the things that you can do that you can't do in WordPress.
That's a very good s- close back. As we begin to wrap up, what is a book that you might recommend for our audience?
I mean, I like The Innovator's Dilemma. So in that book, they talk about this idea that if you have a company, you got to keep the lights on. Well, that's one function of your company, and surely you need to do that. If you try to innovate within that part of your company, you're never going to get anywhere because keeping the lights on is always going to be priority. And so I think one of the big takeaways is how to break that off, focus on innovation as a separate function. And then there's a whole bunch of things around it. And from, when that book was written and now, like today, you can do so many things with AI to compress that cycle. And so at TinyPulse, we were huge fans of a Google Sprint. It was 5 days with like 8 people in a room, and that felt great. 320 hours to come up with a prototype. Well, we just did a prototype at Georgetown's class in 80 minutes, right? Where they walked through this thing, and then output of their exercise was a prototype that you can then say, hey, you know what? Based on these 4 jobs to be done and these customer personas, I want you to create a 20-person focus group and give me feedback. All of a sudden, now you've fully compressed your cycle and you can start to make better decisions on whether you want to double down on that, do some more work on it, or kill it. Right. And so I think that's a great book to kind of get the right framework around innovation, because if you're not innovating your processes, your products, your services, it's going to be a tough 10 years ahead.
And famously, that was the book that Steve Jobs was reading when he passed away,
Hmm.
incidentally.
I didn't know that.
Yes, yeah, that was the book that he was on. How can people learn more about you and your business?
Good question. So I have a online school. So we actually do online and offline training for people, but it's ai-officer.com. And so my feeling is that the AI officer is an interesting, people talk about the CAIO, and I saw this 6-month program in Singapore. I won't name the university. And the output of the program was you have 2 full days of class and then online, and you end up with a roadmap. If you're taking 6 months to end up with a roadmap, you're probably dead in the
Cooked.
water already, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so if you wanna learn about me, so AI Officer is my business, and I think more about the people that do the work, and AI Officer is a mindset. It's not so much a job in your company. Your marketing professional can have that AI Officer mindset, then they can start organizing information, building workflows, creating instructions, and solving problems. So, yeah, so you can catch up to me there, and happy to chat.
What haven't we covered off today that you were hoping to cover off?
Gosh, I think we got to pretty much all of it. Yeah, I mean, I
Wonderful.
like to think yeah, I like to think about the compression of time, and how AI is exposing our flaws. The other 50% and those 3 core skills are foundational. Tools, you know, not really my thing.
Fair enough. Well, Dave, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. It's been a fascinating conversation, and your perspective and take. I think I value them, and I know the audience values them as well. So, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.